It has been said that average people want you to stay average. Welcome to the Breaking Average podcast, the podcast designed to challenge you to break the mold that average has on the world. Each episode offers insights directly from those who choose to break average every day. Now, for the latest insights, here are your hosts, Paul Gustavson and Mike Harbour.
Hello and welcome to the Breaking Average podcast. I am super excited to be here with you today and share time with the world. My name is Mike Harbour, and joining me today is my co-host Paul Gustavson. Hey, Paul, how are you today, my friend?
Mike, doing great. Happy New Year to you. Exciting to be here with you again, doing another podcast. So this is going to be fun.
It is a new year, 2021. Thank God, right? I mean, it's who didn't want to get 2020 behind us? So I'm glad we're into a new year for sure. Hopefully this is going to be a much better year for all of us. You know, also today joining us in studio, we have a couple of our Breaking Average friends to dive deeper into our leadership discussion, which is discovering your strengths. Paul, you got any strengths you want to talk about today?
Oh, man, I love this discussion. I can't wait. I think it's a great way to start the year, right? Discovering our strengths. So, yeah, but before we get started, let's check in with Diane and Rick. Hey, guys, how you doing?
Hey, Happy New Year. How are you?
Yeah.
Happy New Year.
Doing fantastic. In fact, your comment about 2020, read an article talking about how they're anticipating the new roaring 20s. And I thought that was an interesting take we're a century later, we had the roaring 20s in the 1920s. And because of the pandemic and being locked down, the city's going to change. The way we live our lives are going to change, but they're expecting a huge comeback in the roaring 20s of 2020s.
Yeah. Love it. I love it.
Yeah, that would be cool. I certainly have that desire, that aspiration myself. What's interesting is in our last podcast, we kind of kicked around what would be our word of the year coming up for 2021. And here we are. It's 2021. And I don't know about you guys. Did you fine tune those words? I'm just curious before we get started on this strengths discussion. Rick, what's your word for 2021?
It was persist, but it changed to stabilize. It really, I need a stabilization. So 2020 was the year of transition. I picked that word prior to COVID, and now stabilize is my word for 2021.
Yeah, that's good. I like it. Stabilize. How about you, Diane?
So my 2020 word was harmony. Not quite sure how that worked out, but for 2021, it is focus, because I think the thing that I've learned in 2020 was how scattered I had been and getting really focused. And, nothing like a new year that's full of hope to bring us back to what's really important. I think that was probably the biggest gift of 2020 for all of us.
Yeah. Focus on that hope. That's good. How about you, Mike?
Yeah, I think, I was just going to speak into Diane a minute. Diane, that word harmonize for you in 2020 was good, especially in this group, right? You have to provide a lot of harmony, keep Rick and I from killing each other and Paul going crazy, right? Luckily, we're all like socially distanced, literally, through our podcast platform is good. But yeah, Paul, my word for 2021 is dominate. And you know what that means for me? I just want to be not that I want to dominate others. I want to be a dominant messenger, right? Of leadership and breaking average. And when people think of growth and personal growth and leadership growth, I want to be that dominant voice in their mind, someone that they know they can get consistent personal development, leadership development from. So that's really what that means for me.
Yeah, I kind of like the way you described it. Was really good, because you could be a guide to help somebody. Really, you're empowering other people. The way that you just described it is guiding that with that message, which is good. I think for me, my word that I shared last time is still the word. It's connect. In this tough 2020 that we just kind of endured, and now we're into 2021, I realized the importance of connection. My word for 2020 when I started the year was delight. Who knew that COVID was going to happen? But, that was a good word too, because I had to find just that delight in the things that we had, despite the circumstances and the conditions around us. There's always something to be thankful for. So that was a good word. Yeah. But for me this year, the word's connect. So,
yeah, so good. So good. So good.
So good.
Yeah. Hey, we just want to say Happy New Year to all of our Breaking Average listeners, no matter where you're coming from. We literally have listeners all over the world on the Empowered Living Show. Thank you for being a viewer of our show, and hopefully we will add even more value to you in 2021 to help you grow and experience those roaring 20s that Rick talked about as well. You know, this episode, Paul, we're going to talk about strengths and the strengths that we have us for, and then hopefully inspire others to kind of look within and discover their own strengths as they move into this year to really help them be more successful in their lives, their businesses, and whatever endeavors they have. So let's jump in. You guys ready?
Ready.
Absolutely.
So let's talk about this idea of strengths. And Rick, I'm not talking about your Popeye pose here. I'm talking about, you know, the internal strengths that we have that help us be more successful communicators, more successful leaders, more successful business owners, entrepreneurs, whatever that is. So why is it important to discover and know what our strengths are? And also those around us. Paul, why don't you jump in first and kind of get us going in this discussion?
Yeah, you know, I love that question. It reminds me of have you guys seen the Jumanji movies, the recent ones with The Rock?
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
They're so funny. It's a great watch. And I love, there's a couple of scenes in both the movies that came out where they have the strengths and weaknesses scene. You know, here they are, they've jumped into this video game and they've got to unpack what it is that they have, their strengths based on each character. And so like The Rock's character, who's Dr. Bravestone, his strengths are fearless, climbing, speed, boomerang, smoldering intensity. His weaknesses, I think in the first movie, it's none. And then later in the second movie, he's got a weakness of switchblades. And then Kevin Hart's character, I forget the character's name. It's the strengths are zoology, weapons valet. And then his weaknesses is cake speed and strength. And I laugh at that, but it's so good because there they are. They're about to take a journey and they're going to take that journey together, and they have to be aware of what each other's strengths are for themselves, but also for one another. And The Rock's character, Dr. Bravestone, I forget where he says it, but he says, we can help each other. We all have special skills. And I think that's a great take on this. It's important for us to understand what our strengths are so we can step forward into the opportunities that exist, but also so that we can do that with other people. I remember when I was in high school, guys, did you guys have an Army recruiter that came in and gave you an aptitude test? Did anybody that have?
Yeah, the ASVAB. Yep.
Yeah.
I remember that. And that was like a groundbreaking moment for me. Because I had never gone through that aptitude test, and it measures your strengths and your potential career opportunities. And of course, they're looking to see what kind of success you could have in the military. But it was really about career exploration, again, eye-opening, and it made me realize, you know, what I wanted to be, what I could do well at, as far as like engineering and, you know, just sort of the pioneering creativity that really came out of that. And so I think having an awareness of our capabilities is a key to understanding our strengths. What is it that we're capable of doing, and leveraging that. And there are those moments though where we just don't know what our strengths are, and we need somebody else to kind of reach in and help guide us and direct us. We need a dominator to kind of help, you know, I'm using Mike's term there, to kind of guide us and like, hey, look, here's where your strengths are. We need you've seen, you know, the movies with Gandalf, right? Where the guide's helping Frodo. We need somebody to help show us the strengths of what we have. We need a coach maybe to help identify that. So those are some thoughts that I have as far as that. But I love the Jumanji example of strengths and weaknesses. It's so much fun.
Fantastic remake of that movie. And yeah, I love the movie myself as well. And love how you brought that in to our discussion, Paul. You know, we had a great series back the end of 2020 where we talked about movies. Maybe we could go back and revisit the Jumanji movie in an episode.
I think so. I think so.
That would be fun. Diane, what about you? Why are strengths so important from your perspective?
Oh, they were freeing. So I remember in high school taking some sort of test. So maybe it was the same as ASVAB. And for me, it was the nurturing part of it. And I started to become a little bit of a strengths geek after that, and understanding where, we don't all have to be great and stop. It helped me stop with the comparison, right? Because so many times we're programmed to look at our weaknesses and improve our weaknesses. And looking at that and going, "Ugh, if I just spent more time on my strengths and improving those, so much freedom came out of that." And I think that that's important. And I'm so distracted, Mike, right now, because, The Rock's smoldering intensity is going to be my word for your dominant word this year. I
Gotta get
put it out of my head.
Yeah. Let's see that smoldering look, Mike.
That's it, isn't it?
That's
Is that what he
it.
does?
That's it.
Rick, can you cut that out, man?
No way.
No.
No way. Well, what's
good.
funny? Funny with the Jumanji movies, though, to get us from the comedic break there from Mike, it was but they also had switched. So remember, the person who was playing Dr. Bravestone was somebody who wasn't naturally brave, and then Kevin Hart's character, which just killed me. He was like, "How are my weaknesses speed and strength?" He was a football star,
Yeah.
and so not only do they have these strengths, they're different strengths that they had to embrace, which I found incredible. And that was one of those movies I was dreading going in to watch. I was like, I'm generally not a fan of remakes, but I think that's one of the best remakes I think I've ever seen. I was dying in that movie, but I think it's awareness, though, right? That what even happens in Jumanji, but what happened within me too is, they were able to hit a button right here in their heart, and it tells them their strengths and weaknesses. But once they were aware of those strengths and weaknesses, then they were able to utilize them. And I think that's why it's so important to go through some of these assessments like ASVAB, or, the thousands that sit out there on the web now, is so that we can create that awareness and grow into them. But I was like you, Diane. I was very focused on weakness, not strength, right? We almost neglect our strengths to work on our weaknesses versus embracing our strengths to overcome our weaknesses. And I think that that's something that I really learned later in life.
Yeah, that's so good. I love that Jumanji movie. Look, the original movie with Robin Williams was fantastic, right? But the remake, I've watched the remake at least 10 times. Number one, I love Kevin Hart and The Rock together. I just think they make great movies. Central Intelligence, if you haven't seen that, it's fantastic as well. But how they brought the strengths in, Paul, and I love how you brought that movie in this discussion. I think about all of us recently took this assessment called Stand Out by Marcus Buckingham. And one of my strengths is pioneer, and pioneers have a bias for action. But I think of it reminded me as we were talking here that, yes, that's a strength for mine. I've always had a bias for action, but I've had to overcome maybe some weaknesses like fear of being found out, right? Or fear of looking dumb, or fear of being wrong, because that is a fear for me. And now, naturally today, I'm someone who likes to take charge. I like to be on a stage. I like to speak, teach, train. But for years, I kind of left that dream on the shelf because I was afraid. I had a fear I had to overcome. And in that movie, right, there were fears that these characters had to overcome to really live into their strengths and really believe in that, right? Because naturally, Rick, as you said, they didn't have those strengths that were theirs in the movie were not their strengths they had in real life. And I think it's just so that movie, even it's not a philosophical movie. It's one that all of us could watch and learn from about, okay, what do we got to do to overcome like our fears, our weaknesses, to really live into those strengths and own who they are. But also those strengths can become weaknesses for us, right? I think of The Rock, who, one of his strengths is he could punch somebody really hard. What was the strength called in that, Paul? I can't remember. He could knock them through the roof, but owning his own strength, right? Not letting that become a weakness for him. And
he was fearless and,
all powerful, whatever it is. Right. And I think for me, and maybe you guys can relate to this as well. Like, I have this strength of a bias for action. You all know that about me because we've been together a lot. Like, I'm ready to go. Let's go. I'm impatient. That can become a weakness for me, right? Especially if I haven't spent time in gaining buy-in from others that aren't ready. Maybe I haven't sold my idea enough. Maybe I haven't spent enough communicating a vision or gaining buy-in. So I think when we think about strengths, we also have to be aware of how that can become a weakness for us too. So any other thoughts on that, Paul? You want to add before we move on?
Yeah, I love the take that you guys have, and it is fun to watch that movie, but it's just a reflection for us. The philosophical element of that movie is just realizing, wait a minute, we do have strengths and we have weaknesses, and yet we have others around us that can help shore up some of those weaknesses. Mm-hmm. And you're right, sometimes our strength can be a weakness, but how can we leverage our strengths so that it continues to support not just ourselves, but other people around us? So, pretty powerful. Yeah. I think it's important for us to really take time, take inventory. And what's interesting is we don't just do it once. We don't do it when we're in high school and do an ASVAB one time. We got to go back and reevaluate our strengths and how are we leveraging those strengths? So those are some of my thoughts on that.
I think, Paul, this is kind of a great time to, again, shameless plug, but talk about, we're called the Breaking Average Podcast, but talk about this book, Breaking Average, 7 Critical Factors to Team Strong Leadership, right? And when you think about team strong leadership, realizing and recognizing the strengths that everyone on the team has. All 4 of us, we work together here on the Breaking Average Podcast. We all have different strengths. I certainly cannot do these things that Rick does to make us look good and sound good with his editing and those kind of things. I can't do that. I probably could figure it out, but I don't have the patience to do it, right? I'm not skilled enough there. Paul, you're more of kind of a visionary. You kind of paint the vision out there. I kind of bring some structure to it. Mm-hmm. Diane brings some calm to it. When I just think of the kind of the 4 roles that we play in. And I think as we talk about breaking average, and those of us who are leaders, realizing that we need to utilize, I hate to use the term utilize the strengths that each person has on the team to make everybody be more successful. And we could talk a whole lot more about that as well. But let's transition a little bit. Let's be a little bit transparent with our listeners for a moment and talk about our own strengths. I've shared a little bit of mine just a minute, but Dan, what do you feel your strengths are and how they really help you? And then maybe sometimes where those are challenges for you.
When I sat here and I retook this, we all, because we're learners, we're kind of those assessment geeks. So it's always interesting to see what view comes up. And so in this standout one, my top 2 were provider and stimulator. And as I was reading it, because the provider senses other people's feelings and they feel compelled to recognize these feelings, give them a voice and act on them. And then the stimulator part is I'm sensitive to other people's emotions, feel responsible for them, for turning them around and elevating them. And so there's a lot of times where that's awesome because in bringing in a team, when you think, and I align that to my DISC style. So that's the director. I can see where people's strengths are and I'm not afraid to take charge, but to be calm, right? I always find myself in the role of, if the crap is hitting the fan, I'm going to be the one that's going to stand in there and say, okay, it looks messy, but we're going to pull it together and you're going to come over here. You're going to come over here. You're going to come over here. And as I sit there and I look at my strengths, I've been a natural born people developer my entire life. As I looked back at that, that's what I do. The weakness part of that is I can insert myself in places where I don't need to be because I can see, I don't need to rob somebody of their muscles. I need to let them stand on their own 2 feet. I don't always have to intervene for them. And being responsible for other people's stuff is a weakness of mine. I pick things up that are not mine. And sometimes when I think that I'm helping, I might be robbing somebody of their ability to use their muscles. And so that's the part where that's probably been my biggest aha over 2020 was, that's not my monkey. It's not my rock. I need to go put that back down and I need to give you the ability to do it. I'll be here to support you, but I don't have to do it for you. So that's a big one for me.
That's so good. I love that. It's not a weakness I have, Diane. I mean, it probably, I mean, literally, I think it's a strength. My wife is similar to you. I don't pick other people's stuff up, right? Which sometimes can be a weakness because I lack compassion for others at times, right? And I just say, hey, man, I hate it for you, but I got other stuff to do, right? And so sometimes I'm not in tune to that enough. That's where that becomes a weakness for me as well. So thanks for sharing that. I think a lot of our listeners can relate to that as well. Rick, how about you? I know, you've got a lot of different strengths in a lot of different areas, but tell us about those, but also share with our listeners a little bit how those become challenges for you in some ways.
Yeah, I've always said that weakness is really overdone strengths. It's when we're overdoing our what gives us strength that pushes us into that direction of weakness. And I always go back to high school or to kind of our formative years, because that's when we're acting on instinct. We really haven't fully developed what our style is or awareness of what our skill set is. And in high school, there just really didn't seem to be a room or situation that was too big for me. Like I was comfortable anywhere. You put me in any competition, you put me in a room full of people. I didn't really care who the people were. I just naturally flowed into the room, and it didn't bother me, right? It wasn't like, oh, there's some star there, and and you get into that weird kind of state. It was just comfortable for me. I was always comfortable in any room. And then I also had even thinking about that, like when I was starting out with the music industry, and I'm sitting in the room, like I had to meet like Quincy Jones. I'm like 16 years old, and I'm like on the couch, leaned back, rapping with Quincy Jones, and people are like so fearful to even start to talk with him. But then that I didn't know that was a strength, but because I had the ability to do that, then I was memorable to people because I just treated them as people. I didn't treat him as, Quincy. Literally, when you're sitting in this room with Quincy, I mean, he's got this wall. It's like 80 Grammys up there, and there's the platinum albums that he's produced. I mean, he's just accomplishment rich, and we're just sitting there just chilling as if that was like my dad's house. It was like it was no big deal to us. The other thing that I realized though is that my mind had a natural ability to see process. So the way to describe it to somebody is, if you put a bunch of boxes on the wall and you're trying to show what was going on in my brain in a movie, then these boxes would just highlight in gold, just this connection of the easiest path through all those boxes. And there it is. And that's just the way my brain naturally processed. And so I had no idea how that was going to impact my future. So those were my strengths that I really relied on is being able to see an ending, and guide people there, and being comfortable enough to make sure everybody was good to get to that end point. For me, my biggest weaknesses though was anger. I was so quick-tempered and I was so quick-witted that a lot of times I made career-limiting moves with my mouth. I would say something, that was meant to be funny, that would come out inappropriate. I would pop off when something didn't go the way it was supposed to go. And so I was very quick tempered. And that also then centered really around the ego is early on, because I was having such early success. If I wasn't right, it was somebody else's problem. It wasn't mine. Right. I was kind of always right. And recognizing that, the other people had skill sets was not a forte of mine. And so once I kind of got that in charge mode, it was my way or the highway. And so that took a long time to really overcome and really teach myself how to temper. And what's funny with anger is that there's still flashes of anger that's very quick for me. You just would never see it now. So it's not something that I necessarily changed. It was part of my personality. I just realized how it impacted others and how to withhold it and rein that back. But I still get those flashes. I just deal with it differently than I did before.
That's good. Who's Quincy Jones? I mean, what team did Quincy Jones play for? see, that's a strength that you have, Rick, that I admire, is the ability to kind of pull from movies and music. And I can listen to a song. It's crazy. My wife and daughter can listen to a song and they have the words memorized like immediately, right? I can listen to a song 1,000,000 times and never remember the title, the singer, the words. Now, you give me something to do with leadership, and I read, quote, stuff like that. I mean, it sticks. And so therein lies like this strength, right? Or these interests that we have, the things that we're really interested in. I've often said, I was a horrible student because there was nothing at school I was interested in. Like, I mean, I barely graduated high school, barely graduated college. And then I found leadership, personal growth while I was in the Army when I was in my early 20s. And then everything just clicked, right? I finally got into my strength zone, things that I was really interested in. So, Rick, I appreciate the strengths that you do bring to the table. I'm so glad that, you've realized being around me, you're not always right now. See, there's a weakness I have, right? Pointing out your weakness. But anyway, we could have a lot of fun with that. Paul, how about you, my friend?
This is great. This is one of those moments here like Jumanji where we're sharing sort of our strengths and we're talking about our weaknesses too, to be honest with you. And it's never fun to kind of highlight what our weaknesses are, but I think it's important to have these kind of discussions with your team. And we'll talk about that later here in terms of finding ways to challenge your team members with strengths and weaknesses. For me, Mike, beyond the aptitude test I took in high school, which I love, by the way, more than SATs. I did not like SATs, right? But the ABS-VAB, that was kind of cool. That kind of woke me up. It was sort of like what Diane said. It sort of made me realize that, hey, wait a minute, we all offer something. We all can make an impact. And there's certainly lots of good tests that you can take. Strength Finders is one, but Diane's already mentioned it, and Rick as well. We both, all four of us, took the standout test with Marcus Buckingham. And I've done it multiple years, and just did it recently before this podcast. And I was expecting the same results as before. Well, guess what? The results changed. Right? So what used to be pioneer and connector, Mike, which I think is still in my sweet spot, those weren't the top two anymore. My top two this time was teacher and stimulator. So I had teacher, stimulator, pioneer, provider, connector. And I'm so thankful for those because it's allowed me to kind of step into who I am. Knowing what our strengths are allows us to go beyond the fear that we might have and realize, wait a minute, I have a strength in this area despite the fear that I might have. I remember when it was first identified that I was a connector, I was like, what, really? I'm a connector? And others, I went and evaluated it. You were one of them, by the way. I said, hey, Mike, tell me how I'm a connector. I need to understand this. And you explained it to me. And once I got it, it was like a light bulb went on. I'm like, wow, yeah. And I love connecting. I love doing that part. And by the way, for all our listeners and those viewing this, you can go take this test as well. Just go to marcusbuckingham.com. And at least at this time of this recording, you should be able to take it. If you just go to Gift of Standout as the subtitle, and we'll put it in the show notes, you should be able to take that assessment as well. But yeah, those are some of my thoughts. And certainly I have to be careful to the point that was made earlier. Just because it's a strength, if you overuse and overplay that strength, it can become a weakness. It can be a limiting factor. So you really need to kind of lean in on others and allow them to leverage their strengths and be a complement to somebody with what they have, and allow them to support you and you support them. So how about you, Mike?
Yeah.
What are your,
yeah,
what are yours?
Thanks, Paul. That's good. I love what you just said. I think self-awareness is the key, right? You can know what your strengths are, but not really be self-aware of them. And what I mean by that is how they show up at the wrong times. Rick mentioned his anger challenges. I too struggle with that, and not letting, I need to be self-aware enough to recognize when that's coming and not let it get the best of me. Right. I'm a natural driver, meaning, let's go, what are we waiting on? Let's move. Let's make a decision. Let's quit thinking about it. Let's quit, talking about what we're going to do and do something. You can even feel my intensity when I start talking about that, right? There's nothing more challenging to me to be in a room of people who have to think about it more. I mean, it's so the weakness, the challenge that I have there, right, is sometimes I can pull the trigger before I've even aimed at the right target. And And then what happens is I lose trust in those moments. I make people mad. I hurt people. I'm really good at hurting people's feelings. I try to have a lot of fun here on this show, but look, that's sometimes, that's a natural for me to, and I don't mean it that way, right? To hurt people's feelings. I just like, let's go, let's make a decision. Let's quit thinking about it. So my two top strengths are Pioneer and Equalizer, right? And when you think about Equalizer, how many of you one of my favorite actors, literally not one, but probably my favorite actor of all time is Denzel Washington. And he's got a movie called Equalizer. Have y'all seen that movie?
Yeah.
That's me. I mean, that Equalizer, that's me. Like, let's make things right. That, and of course I wouldn't do what he does because he's a bad man and I'm not. But in that movie, he tries to make all things right, put order to things, and then when people are out of alignment, bring everything back into alignment. And that's really, I think that's a strength for me, Paul, is to put order, to get the trains running on time, and move people toward a direction. Mm-hmm. Where that really shows up is where I can sometimes get out in front of others when I feel like they're waiting, dragging their feet, or just being indecisive. Which, for you, Diane, that's why I need someone like, hey, remember the people, Mike. Remember there are people involved.
Right.
And I need someone to help me remember that. So let's kind of transition now. Rick, I'm going to come to you first with this question. What are some ways that we can identify and leverage strengths in others? I think it's important. Paul, I love the movie Jumanji that Paul brought to the table. It was easy for them, right? They push a button and they could see each other's strengths. We don't, unfortunately, maybe we don't have that luxury, but what are some ways that we can do that, Rick?
Yeah, and really quickly, I just wanted to comment on when we're talking about overdone strengths. It's something that I talk to people that ask me about, speaking, professional speaking, because ego was one of those things that it was something that I struggled with. It wasn't a real struggle of ego. It was more the perception of ego.
Right.
Because if you were in my brain, I'm so hard on myself. Like I'll come off a stage and somebody will say, "Oh, that was a fantastic speech." And I'll be like, "That was a 6." Like I knew there was more I could give, right? And I'm just so hard on myself and so self-deprecating that I learned, because I was aware that I would come off as egotistical, that if I made fun of myself right in the beginning, I could connect with the audience a little bit better, because I'm sending the message that if you hear ego or something in a phrase, it's not intended, right? It's easier to pick it up for me, but it's not intended. And that really allowed me to start to connect with my speaking audience a lot more. So I come out and talk about my failures and what I learned from them instead of my successes, right? It's just that awareness has allowed me to bridge the gap, because the perception of ego was greater than what the ego really was, if that makes sense. Having said that, then when I start to look at my team, I have a different take on this, because it's simple to say, watch the people. When are people drawn to them? When are they pushed away? And that's when you can find their strengths. But I ended up challenging a big process in my industry. My industry is project management, and there's this typical thought of you own the project, right? That's what we're told. They tell every young project manager, you own the project. And I always question, I was like, what do I own? I was like, those people don't report to me. It's not my money. What my idea? Like, what am I? Oh, that's right. The blame for when the project goes wrong. That's what I'm here to own. But there is a perception that when you give a project to a project manager, that project manager owns it start to finish. Well, I struggled with that as a PMO manager. I had 8 project managers that reported to me at a bank, and I started to notice their skill sets. And I had one that was really good at organizing a plan and getting the plan going. But once the plan was going, she got bored with the project, right? She liked that creation side. I had somebody else who was very, very creative in terms of the marketing side of it and coming up with those types of pitches, but didn't really like to write project schedules. And it started to dawn on me. I was like, well, I want this person to write really every schedule for every project that we have, and this person to be involved in any of the creative sides. And so I started to break up the processes and challenge the notion, should a project manager own the project start to finish? And our PMO was so successful because we were able to leverage the strengths of each one of the team members and what they could provide. And I think that that's important, is that you start to recognize when people shine and recognize what they shy away from and build processes that enhance that.
Yeah, that's good. It's so Rick, what are some tools that you use to recognize those strengths that others have to make sure you're putting them in their strength zone, right?
The biggest thing I do is watch. It's create a situation to test each one of the skill sets and then just watch how they thrive. And you can see that natural instinct. It's about paying attention to others.
Yes.
It's about focusing and watching, and the downtimes. It's almost part of my stage training. A lot of my stage training is you don't watch what's center stage, you watch what's going on around it. Right. And so, and that's where you can really pick up things is it's not necessarily watching the person present it, it's watching how people are reacting to the presentation that you can really start to find when people are leaning in or being pushed away. And that's what can help identify some of those strengths. So for me, it's watching the team dynamics. When we're doing we do a team meeting called the work breakdown structure. And I'm always watching for who's not participating or when certain people are participating, not necessarily what's happening in the room. And that allows me to identify strengths and be able to nurture.
That's good. It reminds me, I wish I had the book sitting right here in front of me, but it's in my reading spot. But Paul Gustavson sent me a book recently by Jocko Willink, Strategies and Tactics. I can't remember the title of the book exactly, Paul. You may remember, but there's a story in there, Rick, that you reminded me of where Willink, when he was a young soldier, a young SEAL, and they walk in and they're doing some training. They're walking in this room and everybody's looking down the sight line of their weapon. Nobody was making a decision. He kind of backs out. Paul, you probably remember the story. He kind of backs out and detaches himself from the sight line so he can see what's around him and observe what's going on and then point direction. And so the story you just shared, Rick, I think it's a vital leadership skill for breaking average, right? For moving your teams forward from getting stuck and being average and mediocre to moving them forward. So it's a fantastic concept. Diane, I'd love to kind of learn a little bit about you and what you do to identify and foster those strengths in others as well.
Yeah. And Rick, I completely agree with you. It's about the watching of the people. And when you were talking about the PMO and you took me back to my bank days, and it's so important to pay attention. And sometimes doesn't show up as a strength. Sometimes it shows up as a weakness. And in my prime example of this is one of the gentlemen on my team. Now, I was running a customer service team that was a global team on top of it. So we're mixing in varieties of cultures on top of it. And this one individual on my team, he was so dedicated. He loved to make sure things were right. The worst role he was in was being on the phone, because you were here to serve and you were here to answer. And of course, in a customer service role, you're answering the same question over and over again. And what he couldn't do was see gray. There was an opportunity where sometimes you just needed to bend the rules. You sometimes needed to take that extra step. He was horrible at it. He would get so angry, like physically angry, have to drop his headset, all of those things. And as I sat there and I watched him, the best role for him was to be able to have that black and white role. I took him off of the phones. I put him in a processing role where he was sitting there individually. He could, if I needed a mistake found, he was the man that I needed to give it to. He made sure that tasks were followed all the way through. And so sometimes it's not necessarily making sure where you're seeing where that person's shining. Where's that friction coming up, and where can you reallocate that resource? And it does take that. It takes that awareness. It takes that understanding, and it takes that patience to have a conversation to see what's making that anger bubble up or that criticism bubble up. And all of us know DISC, so he was probably the highest C I've ever met in my life. But that's another one of the assessments. If you want to know what your strengths are, you can take a DISC assessment, and we all experience that and know where our strengths are from that and our weaknesses.
Yeah, it's fun to use those assessments and really understand why, right? And then help move people along. Paul, how about you? Things that you've used or think we should all be aware of to help identify those strengths in others?
Yeah, this is great. And one of the things that kind of sparked in my mind a memory that came back was I was coaching high school soccer. This goes back to Rick's comment about watch. And my second year as varsity coach, I got a mentor to kind of guide me. He was an Olympic development coach, and he was helping out. He volunteered to help. I'm like, wow, I felt a little intimidated at first because he obviously had more strengths than I did, but he taught me some stuff. He was a guide. And I remember before practice, I'm ready to go. And he says, Coach, hold off. I'm like, hold off. I said, it's time. He goes, I know, but let's see how they self-organize. What? Yeah. The best way for us, it's early in the season. We haven't even had our first game, but you really want to see what you've got. And you're going to see what you've got to see how, based on how they self-organize. So we sat there for 15 minutes and we saw how this team, who was going to be the leaders in there, who was going to pull the folks together to start, kicking the ball around and getting some warm-ups going and things like that. And it was hard for me initially just to, not step in and do something, but I had to let that happen. It was sort of like what Rick was talking about. It was a way for me to observe. And I learned so much from that little lesson that was so good. But when I think about strengths, guys, there's really two things that come to mind, right? There's two kinds of strengths, and maybe there's more, but I was thinking about this earlier. There's character strengths and there's capacity strengths. And when we talked to Stephen Shedleski, he was talking about, Simon Sinek's work. Simon wrote, Start with Why or Find Your Why. And then also this latest book, The Infinite Game. And so there's two elements. There's purpose and there's basically our just cause. And part of that, what I really kind of gleaned from that was that, our character strengths are derived from our journey. What's happened in our journey, our past, if you will, the lows and the highs, those kind of shape us. And our strengths they're never strengths. Our strengths are never strengths from the start, by the way. We have to fail and fumble a few times, and then we finally get it. And then all of a sudden this becomes a strength. And so there are experiences that we've all endured and gone through. And it's just something to think about, that we have this foundation. Character strengths are foundational strengths. They're based on our past, our journey, where we've gone through, the experiences that we've had. And, it's, those experiences shape our personality. It's in a movie, you see that. Some of the best movies, it's all about character development. You want to see what the characters are like. And based on that foundation, you can build a whole story. Well, that gets to the next part, right? It's not just character strengths, but it's also capacity strengths. And capacity strengths are the things for which are in front of us. They're growth strengths, the areas that we can grow. And we can build on the foundation that we have of our character strengths, but we're not limited by that. We can go beyond it. And we got to get out of our comfort zone. And we're shaped by the mission that we have, the dreams, the goals that we have, the aspirations that we have, the growth that we seek. That shapes our capacity strengths. And so I would challenge, as far as if you're leading a team, it's not just the character strengths, but it's the capacity strengths. What's in front of you? What are the opportunities and challenges in front of you? Because that's an opportunity for those capacity strengths, and learn to identify those and foster those and share those. And it starts by getting to know one another and not just their character strengths, but some of their missions and their causes and their aspirations. And go back to that line from The Rock in the movie. We can all help each other. We all have special skills, and it's not just in the area of our character strengths, but it's also in our capacity strengths.
Paul, as you're sitting here and you're talking about that, you're talking about the character strengths, the capacity strengths. I think the third leg of that is values, right? We have to have the same. What are the core values when we're having those conversations? What it does relate to our just cause. It does relate to our character, but what are we valuing? If the values aren't together, then how can we move together as a team? And what do we value?
Yeah, that's a great point. So that's the third leg of the stool. What are our values? So Mike, how about you, man? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I love, Diane just gave me a teaching lesson, the 3 C's to leading with strengths, right? Character, capacity, and core. So I just love that, those core values is a great add to that. And Paul, Diane, Rick, this has been fantastic. I'm not sure I could add a whole lot more. You all are have brought a lot of value to today. I just think the one piece I will add, though, is that as leaders, we have to be willing to see the strengths of others, right? Not be so arrogant that we think we're the only one that can do something, that we are the only one that has the strength, the capacity, the education, whatever it is. And look, I know personally how hard this is. And then also, I coach right now. I've got probably 25, I'd have to count, but about 25 leaders I'm coaching one-to-one. And I'm coaching every single one of them to recognize the strengths of the people on their team instead of trying to do everything. This is a core ability we all have to learn as leaders. As leaders, we grow up thinking if it is to be, it's up to me, right? I'm the leader. I've got to do it. But yet then we take over these teams and then we realize I can't do it by myself. I've got some leaders that call their people stupid. And I'm right. Well, if you think they're stupid, then you're going to treat them like they're stupid. And so trying to coach them out of that. So I think the only piece I want to add is, as a leader, you've got to be willing to see the strengths that others have, to try to recognize those. And to Rick's point, be observant, right? Step back from the action and be observant and try to put people in the action and then watch how they show up to really move them that way. There's a lot of different assessments out there. Diane's mentioned DISC. We've all mentioned Standout, which I love as well. And I think as leaders, you should be willing to invest in some of these assessments, maybe some coaching in yourself to help you focus on those things and move your teams forward. Paul, look, we could probably talk for hours and hours about this topic and how it helps teams break average, but we probably need to land this plane or we're going to put people to sleep.
Yeah, this has been good. And I love this dialogue. And I think, during the course of all our podcasts to come, we're going to continue to pull on strengths in different ways because, it's wide open in terms of the strengths that are out there and that we can do, the capacity that we have. I want to encourage folks to grab a copy of the book, Breaking Average. I think you'll see in there from a team strong leadership perspective, just how to leverage some of the strengths of your teammates and how to encourage that and foster that. So that book's out there on Amazon. And, if you know a top leader that we should interview who helps cultivate strengths in other people, through the vision that they may have or the aspiration that they have, or in just guiding in different ways, we would love to chat with them. So go to our website, breakingaveragepodcast.com/leader, and let us know about that potential leader that we should interview.
Yeah, that's so good. Let's wrap it up with our tip and challenge, which we always like to do to give you, something to kind of think about based on what you've heard today. And Rick, let's start with you, my friend. Your tip and challenge for our listeners today.
Yeah, I think the tip is to create a situation where you can observe your people and thrive. Paul, you told the story about self-organize, and that made me flash back to, senior year in high school playing volleyball. It was the first time that we had this men's volleyball team, and our coach challenged us. It was a Friday night. There was a school dance, and she challenged us, and she said, look, I've got an exercise. If you do it, then you're going to grow as a team and become champions, or you can go to the dance. But if you commit, you got to stay until it's done. And it was a very unforgiving challenge. We couldn't talk during it. We had 1 minute to strategize, and we had to try to execute. And basically, it was 2 poles, 2 strings. We had to get everybody across without touching the strings. Sounds pretty simple, but when you've got, 19, 20, kids, inevitably somebody would touch the string, and she was unforgiving, man. We were like in the last one, and it was a shoelace, and she's like, nope, start over. And we were like, we're missing the dance, But I remember the elation that we had when we actually finished that challenge, and we were so pumped. But I remember even then watching her watch us and me starting to pick up. That's where she found our team captains. That's where she found out who was going to be the support people. That's who she found out who she needed to bring in off the bench to create a spark. I mean, she saw all of that through that exercise. And so create these types of exercises. And the other tip is just talk about it. Like this very conversation, I think we've learned about each other when we start to self-identify what our strengths and weaknesses are to help the team grow. So create a situation where they can discuss those so that you can raise each other's awarenesses as well of what the strengths and weaknesses are.
That's good. I'd have loved to have been a fly on the wall and watch Rick in there in an exercise where he couldn't talk, right?
Yeah. It was difficult.
I'm sure. Diane, how about your tip and challenge?
So true. Well, it's taking it back to knowing yourself first, right? We have to be self-aware. We've talked about that a lot, but I think sometimes when we're self-aware, we don't necessarily see it. So, Paul, I loved that you asked Mike about your strength. How am I a connector? So having that opportunity to have those conversations within your team or within the people that you're working with, how am I showing up for you? And really giving the opportunity of recognizing that strength in somebody else. They might not see it. So I think that's the important piece too, is just really recognizing the strength and then giving them the opportunity to flourish in it and finding those ways to do that.
Yeah, it's good. It's good. Love it, Diane. Paul, coming to you, tip and challenge.
I'm writing. There's so many notes that I wrote down today. I'm hopeful that our listeners and viewers watching this, you've caught something, captured something. Share that thought. We would love to hear your feedback. So look for us on all the different platforms that we're out there and just kind of comment on what you're thinking. But as far as tip and challenge, Diane just said, know yourself. I think Socrates said that, right? Or Socrates.
Wait, Paul. Yeah, it's Socrates. That's the proper pronunciation.
Yeah. It may have been Aristotle. It was probably Rick Morris who said, know thyself.
No, it was definitely Socrates.
Okay, yeah, Socrates. And we really should. We got to take time. Somewhere I was walking through the hallways of our office, and one of those inspirational posters that are ancient and old and probably should go in the dumpster, but it was still good. It said, goals, know where you are so that you know where you're going. Right. Mm-hmm. And I'm like, yeah, where are you? You can't go to that intended destination unless you know where you're at, and knowing our strengths is going to be that part of that. So my tip is, know thyself, right? And ask yourself this question: what are my top qualities? What are my top strengths? And go through the exercise of identifying your character strengths. Maybe ask for feedback, send an email out to 10 close friends or family members and say, hey, look, I'm doing an exercise, a project, and I'm looking to identify my 3 top qualities or strengths. What do you think they are? And that's a powerful exercise. I'd encourage you guys to do it. Even if you've done it before, do it again, because you will get some feedback. It'll be really powerful. If you got a leadership team that you're part of, do it with your leadership team. It's such a powerful exercise. The other one is the capacity strengths challenge, right? So one is your character strengths challenge that I just mentioned, but don't stop there. Go with the capacity strengths challenge and maybe tighten the group down a little bit and start with some of the visions and dreams that you have, what you aspire for. What are the opportunities in front of you? Maybe even the challenges that you face, because there's opportunities in each of those challenges. And our capacity strengths are always outside of our comfort zone. We got to step out of our comfort zone, and we got to look at what it is, the vision that we might have. By examining what Simon Sinek calls our just cause, we can start to identify the capacity strengths in our life. So go through that exercise. Have fun with that. That's my tip and challenge. How about you, Mike?
Hey, wait, Paul, sorry not to interrupt you, Mike, but a story just hit me about you and me that goes back to the story I told about in high school, no room being too big for me. But we were at IMC and we were trying to record Breaking Average. We had some equipment problems and we had to run to our rooms really quickly to find some chords for that kind of stuff. And I was like, let's find a shortcut. And so you and I went through the back hallways of the Marriott, and the whole time Paul's super nervous because he's like, "We're not supposed to be here. We're not. What if somebody says, just let's act like we're own?" And I'm just cruising through the hallway. Not only that, but I know the people are like, "Hey, Mary, how are you?" As we're walking through, and Paul's like, "What are we doing?" But that was one of those moments of where like there's no place I don't feel like I don't belong. I just walk into any room, it's fine with me. But Paul was so nervous through that. It was a lot of fun. That just hit me. Sorry.
No, that's
and
good.
Rick,
yeah.
you knew Mary because she had her name tag on.
No, unfortunately, it's because she was the person who served us all in the evening before.
But yeah, I can see Paul freaking out. He's not a rule breaker at all, right?
Yeah, it was definitely stretching him just a little bit.
I did it, though. That's the point. I did it.
Oh, he was like a kid in a candy store. He was having so much fun with that, Mike. That was like his favorite story from the IMC that year.
Now I go through the back halls all the time.
Yeah, it's nothing. Yeah.
Well, let me wrap us up with my tip and challenge, Paul. The great Billie Jean King, former tennis player, she said, I think self-awareness is probably the most important thing to being a champion. When we think about breaking average, right, that's what we're after as being a champion. It takes me back to the story you wrapped the whole book around, breaking average, Paul, and the rowers and what it took to be a champion and to have self-awareness, right? For their coach to not get nervous and try to force them to the lead early on in those races, because he was so self-aware of their strengths and knew they were great come from behind rowers. That's what self-awareness allows us to do is to know, when to push the gas, when to put the brakes on. And as a leader, we really need to know that. So, my tip is for, Diane mentioned this, hire a coach. Look, if you're struggling and you're not meeting expectations, you're not achieving the goals that you have in life, hire a coach. The greatest thing I've ever done is to pay people to tell me what's wrong with me, right? To tell me what my strengths are, to tell me what my weaknesses are. Even though I knew them already, I needed an outside perspective for me to kind of move away from the things that were holding me back and into my strength zones to help me perform at a better level. So that's my tip. And then the challenge is do it without self-judgment. Rick mentioned this earlier about being, his own biggest critic. I think there's probably not a listener or a viewer of the Breaking Average podcast that is not their own worst critic. I don't know many people, and I used to think there was something wrong with me because that's what I did. Like I was so hard on myself. But the more I learn about other people, I didn't know that about Rick. I didn't think he had any self-criticism, but I just learned that about him today. And I don't think there's a person I know that doesn't have some self-criticism. So I want to challenge you to not do these things with self-judgment, but just to be self-aware, to create self-awareness so that you can move forward and be all that you're called to be in your life and in your leadership, so that you can break average in all areas of life. And that's my tip and challenge for us as we go into 2021. Paul, why don't you close us out, buddy?
Yeah, this has been a great conversation. I really enjoyed our time together, and look forward to just the continuation of some of these topics and discussions in 2021. And we got some great words that we all picked for 2021. For you guys listening and watching, pick that word too. What is that word for you for 2021? And if you'd like to be a sponsor of our show, we'd love to feature you. Perhaps you've got a book coming out, a great idea. Maybe you have a strength that the world needs to know about. And we would love to highlight that, so be considerate, mindful of that. There's a sponsorship opportunity here for you. Just reach out to us at breakingaveragepodcast.com and look for the be a sponsor link, and that'll be an opportunity. So Mike, this has been good.
Yeah, Breaking Average listeners, Empowered Living watchers, we are so grateful that you spent a majority of 2020 with us, and we are excited about the future and what 2020 holds, not only for the Breaking Average podcast and the Empowered Living show, but for you, the viewer, the listener, and what is about to come in 2021. As Rick said, it's the roaring 20s are right before us, and this is going to be a great year, I have no doubt. I'm excited to be here with my friends, Diane Caine, Rick Morris, Paul Gustavson. This has been a great conversation on strengths, and I'm inspired by the lesson, the mission of leadership and Breaking Average. We hope you'll join us on the next episode of the Breaking Average podcast.
Thank you for listening to the Breaking Average podcast. If you loved what you heard, please take a moment to subscribe. All opinions and comments expressed in this podcast are those of the participants and do not reflect the opinions or views of any of the advertisers, producers, or platforms. This show was produced by R2 Multimedia. A special thank you to Milestone Melodies for our theme music. As you continue your day, what is one action that you can apply from this podcast to your life? Tune in for our next episode as we continue to challenge everyone to break average.